Introduce our first speaker. Marc Schein is from Marsh McLennan, which is a large national insurance carrier firm. Marc has spoken in a lot of different forums, in front of Congress, aviation leaders, etc. One of the big things that I'm excited about is this meeting is about best practices in cybersecurity. So your first question may be, why is our first speaker from insurance? And that is exactly why I want him speaking. There are so many different aspects of cybersecurity and the dangers and the risks that cyber attacks have for companies, in particular the supply chain. And Marc's going to talk about those risks, talk about how you can mitigate those risks and share the risk across a multitude of entities in your supply chain. So Marc, without further ado, if I could introduce you.
Good morning, everybody. So from a show of hands, just so I get in a perspective, IT folks, okay, financial folks, leadership folks. So when we talk cyber, we're really talking about each one of those get integrated throughout the company now. When I first started doing these, organizations would say, oh, I'm sending my IT guy to the conference. That's no longer. We're now getting financial folks and we're getting leadership. Why? Because this is a holistic solution that firms need to address. This is no longer a siloed solution. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today. I am Marc Schein. I am the national co-chair of Marsh McLennan Agency, which is the world's largest insurance broker. So we help organizations qualify and quantify the cost of data breach. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. How to qualify and quantify what a data breach costs, and then also the risk transfer mechanisms within a data breach. We're going to be using statistics from two different organizations, Marsh McLennan, which is the world's largest insurance broker, based off of the data that we've surveyed for our clients. Fortunately or unfortunately, I was the one that helped with a lot of these stats, so I am fairly proud of them. And then on the bottom, you see the Ponemon Institute, which is the leading organization in the country for cyber statistics, and I'm the only insurance broker on their board. So you get a nice blend of both third-party statistics as well as Marsh during this presentation. So how did I get here today? I am an insurance geek by trade, if you will. I have my certified insurance counselor designation, commercial lines coverage specialist. As you see, in 2014, I was appointed to the Ponemon board, so this is my 5th year with the Ponemon Institute, as well as working with Claims Litigation Management, which is an insurance attorney and claims organization trying to help best practices to make sure our clients get paid. So hopefully you guys could appreciate this slide. I sent it into my marketing team, and they didn't like all the logos that I had on this, so they made me take all the logos off. So we're going to be talking about a couple of different breaches today. Unfortunately, we can't talk to them in detail about the specific entity due to compliance. But one big box retailer that was the most notorious breach that happened about 2 or 3 years ago actually wasn't breached itself. This particular big box retailer happened to get hit right around holiday times. And what happened was they actually breached the HVAC contractor for this big box retailer. So as we start to see, organizations typically say, Marc, I have 50 employees here in Long Island. Why is somebody going to want to hack me? And then we start talking about social engineering and the difference between spear phishing and then actually phishing exercises. And we'll get to that later on throughout the presentation. Another very important, meaningful breach that I'd like you to think about is one of the largest entertainment companies in the world produced a movie several years ago. And this movie happened to be about the leader from North Korea. Okay? And when this movie from North Korea was about to come out and be released into all the different movie theaters, North Korea came out and said, if you release this movie, Mr. Entertainment Company, we are going to cause bodily injury and property damage to movie theaters. What did they say that they were going to do? They were either going to shoot up a movie theater or they're going to bomb a movie theater. That was the actual threat. So what happened was the movie theater said, I'm not playing around with this. They pulled the movie instantly. The movie went straight to Redbox, went straight to Netflix. So I ask you, think about the lost revenue that this entertainment company did not receive because this movie went straight to Redbox, went straight to Netflix, went straight to Hulu or whatever streaming service. So I want you to start to think in your manufacturing business. In the event that the products that we can't receive, the goods that are coming from overseas, If there's a data breach, if there's something where a ransomware gets put on one of our supplier systems, how will that affect our supply chain? What will our end user do? Will that be a breach of contract? That's what we're going to be talking about today in this particular presentation. The last breach that I like to always talk about, and usually get a couple giggles towards the end of it, happened to be a website for cheating individuals. This particular website was hosted for married individuals to go cheat. And this particular website happened to get compromised. The hackers were morally, felt very passionate about this, and this is a wrong website. So they call themselves no longer activists, they call themselves hacktivists. So they wrote back to the CEO, they said, if you don't take down this website in 2 weeks, we're going to release the treasure trove of data. The CEO said, you're full of it. So the hackers sent them a sample of information that they had within their server. CEO said, we're not doing anything. CEO went back, and this particular company was the largest subsidiary of a portfolio over in London. The parent company was looking to go public on the London Stock Exchange. So what happened? 2 weeks went by. The hackers didn't. The CEO kept the website open. Hackers released all the information onto the dark web. Consequently, this website was then taken down briefly. The parent company was no longer able to file, and still to this day in 2019 did not file on the London Stock Exchange. The valuation was crippled. So when we think about a cyber attack, think about the negative publicity and then the possible ramifications from a financial standpoint. And might I add, when they actually went through all the data that was released on that particular breach, 15% of the emails that they found were actually .gov emails. You'd think people would be a little bit more creative. I think this is an important slide. So we're going to talk about certain things that you need to do in the event of a breach. What actually happens? And we'll get to that in the latter part of the presentation. But I want you to think about this. This was actually a radiology practice here in Long Island that I took this from. And actually my mom and my sister were affected in this particular breach. They got a letter saying your information was compromised, and now this radiology practice is no longer in existence. This radiology practice had 97,000 individuals affected within the breach. So I just, to kind of think about what you need to do, you have to figure out, where are these 97,000 people located? Do we have to get 97,000 stamps? We need to get 97,000 envelopes. Get somebody to package these 97,000 mailers. So you think about the cost and the time that could be associated with the possible data breach. Just something to be cognizant about and why we need to care about this, perhaps more than we did before you came to this presentation. This particular slide is just talking about technology as a whole. Not all technology is good technology, and not all technology is bad technology. You have things like geoengineering, which is controlling the weather by a computer. Now, granted, this is only done in a small radius currently, but imagine by this computer right here, I'm able to control the 1 mile radius, and I can start to change whether it's up 5 degrees or below 5 degrees. Consequently, look at things like artificial intelligence. Depending on which side of the spectrum you sit on, I have clients that think this is the best thing in the world because they no longer need to be hiring additional staff. They're no longer paying the benefits, which is never going down, the health insurance. There's no more payroll. And they believe that this is an efficiency. The artificial intelligence is not going to be pulling out. The program's going to be constantly going, so on and so forth. If you take a look at, if you take the stance of Elon Musk or Stephen Hawking, you think this is going to be the next Terminator that they're going to start to learn and they're going to take us out. So where I talk to my clients, I say, I don't think that they're going to take us out. I think that's for the movies. But what I am concerned about is when we release, like several manufacturers here on Long Island have, where they release numerous employees, 20, 30, 40 employees, because they're now starting to bring on robotic arms or different types of artificial intelligence. If that artificial intelligence does not work the way that it's supposed to, it fails. It starts to work in a way that we didn't intend it to work. We cannot produce the same way that we could have if we would have had the employees. So as you start to engage the additional technology within your organization, I encourage you to think about the possible ramifications if the technology doesn't work. So I think this is one of the most, hopefully, impactful slides for you. Oftentimes, people say to me, Mark, I'm not a big box retailer. I'm not a major hospital. I'm not an entertainment company. Why would somebody breach me? Well, I'll tell you, hackers are lazy. That's the nuts and bolts of it. They go after the weakest targets. They understand that organizations pick a bank that we all go to. They have staffs of 500 people on there combating these cyber attacks on a daily basis. Marsh McLennan, our internal team, combated 17 million attacks in 2018. 17 million. So what's going on is they're typically going after the vendors, organizations like Long Island manufacturing organizations that typically are hooked up into larger retailers where they might be doing the same internal systems and so on and so forth. Well, if they hack into the manufacturer or the distributor, the local law firm here on Long Island, well, chances are we're connected into other networks or other portals within our clients. So then if they can get into our system, chances are they can get into our additional vendors. So this is where we start to talk about the supply chain. I have a client out in New Jersey. They're a cosmetic manufacturer. And they make eyelashes and lipstick and all that kind of stuff. So their biggest concern when they engaged us, they said, Mark, we've been with the same broker for 30 years. This has been from the founder. It was her father's husband. Well, it was the one who went golfing with the broker. I mean, this is one of these long-term relationships. We said, we certainly don't think that we'll be able to create the same type of camaraderie between the two firms. But we do think that there is a direct gap within the program right now. And we were talking about the dependent business interruption coverage. So we were looking at the way that they were getting the raw materials. They were getting the raw materials were coming from Japan, China, as well as Ireland. So what happened was once they were getting the raw materials, they would then assemble it here in New Jersey, and then they would sell it to 4 big box retailers. So we said, we understand that if there was like a Hurricane Sandy event, you would have something called business interruption that would help pay for the lost revenues that you weren't able to collect in the event that you weren't able to operate. Well, what happens if there was a cyber attack and the same issue happened? Your supplier couldn't operate, but it wasn't because of a hurricane or a flood or a tornado, but it's because one of your suppliers were hacked. What would happen? That's exactly what she said. So I personally went over to the London marketplace, and what Marsh McLennan does a little bit differently than most brokers is we manuscript coverage through the London facilities. So we don't go typically and just take something off the top shelf. We can actually manuscript something for a particular company that actually tailor to their needs. So what we did is we brought them to the London facility. We talked about what their true exposures were, what the downtime, the maximum probable loss would be if they weren't able to get their goods from the suppliers. Then, consequently, we said, let's think about, from the other side, worst case scenario, you have 4 major retailers. Let's face it, retailers have been breached, and it's been a fairly common industry to be breached. So if one of those retailers were to go down, and to make it even worse, let's call it around the holiday time, Black Friday to Christmas, what would happen? They said, Mark, it would be probably about 20% of our sales. I said, what happens if we could then ensure the fact that our client, our end user, if they can't sell the products the way that they used to, like they did last year, what happens if we can insure that? And that's an insurable risk because of a certain covered peril, like a cyber attack. They said, Mark, that sounds great, but it can't be done. I said, it can be done. And that's the difference with working with somebody who can go overseas to the Cayman Islands and to London versus somebody who's talking to a wholesaler and they're just getting standard terms and conditions. What I would tell you with cyber insurance, this is not like any other insurance, whether it's workers' comp, health, auto, property, your home. With all of those other lines that I just described, they have a standardized policy. It's called an ISO policy. And then you have, insurer A, they change it a little bit. Insurer B changes it a little bit. They might charge a little bit more. They might give a bell and whistle, and that's their competitive advantage. Within cyber insurance, there is no standardization of a cyber insurance policy. So just show of hands, who here has cyber insurance? By the same show of hands, does anybody know what their cyber insurance actually covers? I bet you don't. Because again, going back to that standardization, we talk about the privacy piece, and that's what most people think about. Cyber insurance, oh, it's my confidential information if I have a bunch of records. But now this product has evolved threefold. Now our clients are coming to us to procure this, really the two main reasons. First, and the main, a contractual obligation. Now one of their clients and or suppliers is saying, unless you carry X number of dollars, and the most common is typically $3 or $5 million that they're being required to carry, if you don't have this certain level of cyber insurance, we're not going to apply you that contract. Funny enough, once that started coming down the pike, we saw a huge spike within cyber insurance. In the past 3 years, we've seen it triple in terms of capacity as well as the rate uptake within the product. So anytime we could not buy insurance, I'm a huge component of that. And this is one of these areas where I think if we can better train our employees, we can mitigate the exposure and then prevent the insurance from having to buy more. Perhaps if we start doing employee trainings, like tabletop exercises in the event of a breach, what would actually happen? Have you mocked out what would basically a mock breach look like? It's basically your fire drill, except it's for your data and your non-tangible assets. This is one of the most critical things that we talk to with insureds, because the carriers want to see that our clients have been cognizant about this. They've been proactive, because we understand, and the insurance industry understands, this is not bulletproof. There's no perfect solution. There's a tremendous amount of products out there. We've identified that there's $120 billion that were spent in 2018 on security products. $120 billion. Marsh, as a firm, had just come out and we just basically put a stamp on the marketplace and said, we're not sure, frankly, how effective this $120 billion marketplace is. People are spending a tremendous amount of money, but yet we're seeing massive claims come in. So Marsh McLennan, world's largest insurance broker, just partnered with the 8 largest cyber insurance carriers and Microsoft as our technical advisor to come out with something called Cyber Catalyst. And what Cyber Catalyst is, and for the IT folks in the room, you may find this meaningful, and I would encourage you, for your vendors, perhaps getting them this Cyber Catalyst designation. So effectively, any security provider could apply for the Cyber Catalyst designation, which just came into effect 2 weeks ago, and the deadline will be closed May 2nd. From May 2nd to June 2nd, me and my team are going to be reviewing with the insurance carriers that we've decided to partner with, as well as Microsoft, on what were the most meaningful solutions out in the marketplace. And if we deem that these solutions are meaningful, you will get a stamp of approval from Marsh McLennan, the 8 carriers, and Microsoft that's called Cyber Catalyst, and you will get a discount on your cyber insurance, and you will also get increased terms and conditions, broader coverage, and increased sublimits because you have the Cyber Catalyst designation. I will tell you, all security providers are not going to be getting this security designation, but if you have your preferred providers that the IT folks in the room are currently engaged with, I would highly recommend you either reach out to myself or my colleague Jeff. We'd be happy to put you in touch with the team, and we'd like to get your submissions in because, again, it's May 2nd is the deadline, so we only have about 2 or 3 weeks left for Cyber Catalyst. So this is one of my favorite slides within the presentation. Oftentimes I go into accounting firms and they say, Mark, we don't have to worry about data breaches. I don't use the computer. I still call everybody. And then they have as far as the windowed glass, it's all file cabinets. And these file cabinets are open. It used to be, we used to write in the insurance industry, we used to try and underwrite to the file protection classification of the particular file cabinet. Now I kind of want you to think about that, except for the computer. So the way that we used to write for the file cabinets, we wanted to understand, could it withstand a fire that was lasting for an hour, 30 minutes? What would be the smoke damage? And that was kind of our thing 10, 15 years ago. Now it's the same thing in terms of encryption. Is your computer encrypted? What kind of safeguards do you have? Is there data classification policies in place? Do you have data segmentation? So on and so forth. I do want to make sure that I am very clear on this, that a data breach could happen from paper as well. It's information. A data breach means any numerical number that you could link to an individual would be constitute as a quote-unquote breach. If the information is encrypted here in New York, you may not have to then notify the state attorney generals and the individuals within the breach, but I would encourage in the event that you do have an incident like that, you reach out to counsel. And that's one of the nice things is if you do have cyber insurance, you would be able to engage counsel at no cost, and then the insurance would start to pay. And then I would also tell you, it's almost like long-term care insurance, where, you know, oftentimes people buy long-term care insurance to help coordinate, you know, their parents from going to a particular doctor to another hospital. This is the same thing within the insurance world. Is this particular product is a coordination of external service providers that are experts within the cybersecurity space. So again, rather than the breach happens and the fire drill is now going on and now you're trying to start vetting people, you know, what's the price, when can you start getting engaged? You don't want to do that after the fact. We want to make sure that we're doing that prior to the incident. So every time I have ever received a claim about a stolen device or a lost device, it was actually never lost. It was actually always stolen, but most of the time organizations don't like to admit to, an employee doesn't like to admit to their organization that the device was lost. But any type of lost or stolen device could constitute as a data breach if the device is not encrypted. You know, when we take a look at my iPhone right here, this iPhone is stronger than the best computer MIT had in 1976. So when we think about this, I was on the Uber coming in from the city here, and I was sending 15 different emails. And what would be the negative consequence of perhaps sending an email to John Doe when it was supposed to go to Jane Doe? And then again, if you don't have the right safeguards in place on that particular email, perhaps the email was encrypted, or you could call that email back, well then all of a sudden you might have to start having to deal with regulators and things of that nature. I just spoke about the emails to the wrong party. I think that between this and ransomware, these were our most common type of claims that we received in last year. When we take a look at phishing and social engineering, this is one of the main reasons why organizations engage Marsh McLennan. When we talk about phishing and social engineering, people say, Mark, is this covered under my cyber insurance? Is this covered under my crime insurance? And this is the area where we say we need to take a holistic approach because this is something called social engineering. By show of hands, do we all know what social engineering is? Okay, so there's a couple folks in the room that don't. Effectively, taking a look at, it could be your social media profiles, starting to get a target for you, and then sending out a specific email. That's more of a spear phishing attack. A general other kind of social engineering attacks could be a mass email saying the CEO is looking for you to send a particular wire transfer or a certain dollar amount. Wire transfers were the most common claims that we received. Consequently, the past 2 months, we've been seeing a dramatic uptick in inventory manipulation claims. So where hackers used to ask for money and dollars and cents, now they're asking for product. And that's something that we've actually tailored our program to now cover. It was very hard to do. Most of the carriers did not want to provide this particular coverage because as you can appreciate, you start sending out several large containers to a particular area that they weren't supposed to go to in the world, you can't really claw that product back. So you can either make sure that you have your safeguards in place, so you have dual verification, so the event that you can't actually send a wire transfer unless you call the person who sent you the email, or consequently, if they call you, you have to email them. That would be a best practice that I'd highly suggest that you implement within your organizations. But again, appreciating the deceptive fraud. We are seeing some very large wire transfers now starting to come in. And this is where we need to make sure that we take a holistic approach by combining the crime and the cyber to make sure that they sit nicely together to respond to this type of incident. Because as good as I think that our cyber program is, and we're the largest broker in the world, and I'm proud to say that I've tailored this program, I will also tell you I'm not naive enough to know that I also need crime to come in when this particular coverage comes into play. So it's certainly, when we talk cyber risk, this is now a holistic solution that we need to start thinking about from a cyber standpoint and not necessarily from a tangible asset standpoint. Because the Ponemon Institute noted that 2017 was the first year that non-tangible assets for the businesses that we surveyed actually superseded the value of the tangible assets. Think about that. So the data that we have was actually more valuable than the property, plant, and equipment that the businesses had. But yet, they were insuring the property, plant, and equipment at 62%, but only the non-tangible assets, the data, because they couldn't touch it, at 16%. Now, I'm not quite sure it's because they couldn't touch it, or if they couldn't measure it, or they just didn't think that it would happen to them. Granted, those were 2017 stats, so I'm sure 2018 will be a little bit different. Ransomware. I said between social engineering and ransomware, these are the two most frequently types of claims that we are receiving. I will tell you, to the folks that raised their hands that said that they had cyber insurance, I would highly recommend you go back and take a look at your cyber insurance and make sure that you do not have a dramatically lower sublimit for ransomware than you do for any other of your coverages within your cyber policy. Because, like the insurance industry, if it's more likely to happen, they're either going to give you less coverage for it or they're going to charge you more. It's one or the other. And that's exactly what's going on right here. Just 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago now at this point, the largest steel manufacturer in the world was hit with ransomware. They were no longer able to operate their systems. They were out of business for 2 weeks, to the point where they finally got back up and running at a functional pace, effectively. The business income loss is going to be massive for this particular steel manufacturer. So how do these breaches occur? It's not just Iran or Russia hacking into your systems. We spoke about the lost or stolen devices. Again, appreciating how much confidential information that we have. If you guys do have corporate devices, we highly encourage that they are encrypted. It could be the difference between notifying state attorney generals and not. Disgruntled employees, oftentimes we see, and there's been several breaches here on Long Island with several school districts, in fact, where they've either expelled a kid or an employee, put the employee out on a temporary leave. And because they did not change the administrative passwords, these particular folks were able to hack in. The student was able to hack in and change him and all of his friends' grades from failing grades in math to they all got A's. I think if you could hack into the computer system, you should be able to pass the math test, but apparently not. Hackers and unsecured websites, of course that's a vulnerability, but it's not the main vulnerability. And I think that's what we need to be appreciative of in this conversation, is it's not Russia and Iran hacking into your systems. Although it can be, the more common way is you're going to be caught up in one of these spear phishing attacks. You're going to get hit with a non-petty or a next WannaCry. That's where we're seeing the next type of wave of going. The one area that I do really want to focus in on this presentation is this vendors and subcontractors piece. This is critical. You know, my football coach used to always say, you're only as good as the next person on your offensive line. You know, if they break him, they're going to get into the quarterback. It's the same thing within your network. As you start to become more interconnected, and it's going to happen, because in 2020, they're expecting 40 billion Internet of Things connected devices, where I was just teaching at FIT yesterday, and one of the students is working on a project where they're making a shirt so they could go to the club and the DJ can control the color of the shirt based on the mood that the DJ wants to create in the club. I mean, think about that. And this is now students. So you got to imagine established companies are about to start rolling out these products. And what I'm telling you is we see it because I actually underwrite what's going on within certain organizations, networks, and in their systems, who's connected to it, who's latched onto it. And what we're seeing is the vulnerabilities of some of these smaller companies are critical. The garbage, the cleaning staff, the payroll company, the small law firm, the accounting firm that you guys deal with on a quarterly basis. In the event that your dependent business partners, the accountants, the payrolls, the lawyers, the insurance guys, the bankers, whoever, are connected into your system, you need to either make sure that you have the hold harmless agreement, which good luck getting from one of these major banks or major credit card processors, or you need to start to identify, maybe this is something we want to transfer to an insurance carrier and try and start to mitigate our costs. So at this point in the presentation, most people say, Mark, you've talked to me about it, you scared me about it, but what does it actually mean and what does it actually cost me? So the Poneman Institute actually noted that the average cost per record is $225 per record. Now, healthcare is obviously much more, and government and public sectors much less. But what you need to start to think about is, what is a record? So Marc Schein, if I was a client of yours and you had my name, you had my social security number, and you had my credit card information, you might say, Mark, I won't have your social security number. Okay, you have my credit card information, you have my address, and you have my name, you have my email. Typical loyalty type stuff where you want to be able to reach out to somebody. We all have that information, both for our clients as well as our marketing that we're doing to try and get additional clients. In the event that that marketing material and or our client database was compromised, on average, that's what we're looking at $225 per record. So again, Marc Schein's information, I'm about $225 for most of the folks here in the room. Unless you're healthcare, you're about $445, and again, private sector, you're looking lower, like $175 per record. So we took a study of organizations that had about 100,000 records within their system, and the average cost of a breach, this is 2017 stats, it actually went up to $7.8 million. I don't think the IT folks that answered this survey were necessarily as honest as they should have been, where 51% of them said yes, they were somewhat aware of exactly what was going on within their network. I suspect that it was more of around the 22% that said that they were not aware, but that's neither here or there. This is an important slide. Think about your industry. Where do you guys lie? So we talked about the average cost of a breach was that $225, sitting right around here. You know, if you're in energy, transportation, technology, life sciences, you're going to be talking about significantly bigger dollars. And typically those people have greater marketing campaigns where they have to start to worry about the information that they have. Consequently, we spoke about the privacy aspect nonstop so far. The one other piece we spoke about, dependent business interruption. But what about the business interruption? So now if our business, whatever the manufacturing, the organization that you guys are currently with right now, if they get hit with some type of ransomware and they're not able to operate, you can't get onto your computer, you get a big skull and crossbones, and it's basically pay us 6 Bitcoin or you're never going to get your information back. You need to start to think about what would you do to be able to, what would be the next step? Would you pay the Bitcoin? And then if you don't get your information, would you still be able to operate? Because if you can't, you need to think about reputational harm as well as business income. Reputational harm is the newest insurance coverage in the cyber insurance marketplace. It's probably one of the newest insurance coverages in just the insurance marketplace as a whole. Reputational harm will say, Mark, we had a breach in 2018. We were doing $10 million. Now in 2019, we're only doing $8 million. We received a material decrease in our sales because of this particular breach. If we were to have this conversation prior to procuring cyber insurance, I would tell you if I go to my London carriers, I can now manuscript this coverage. If I want to do it with the United States carriers, it's going to be significantly more difficult to get this particular coverage here. Now carriers are also throwing in crazy coverages within cyber insurance. I just had a carrier yesterday come into our office, and we're talking about negotiating, manuscripting active shooter coverage into a cyber policy. Non-cyber related. Same thing, you're getting we spoke about reputational loss, the reputational loss income. There's something called reputational guard now that we've just put on. I'm very proud of this. This is something where any negative publicity that you experience, your firm experiences, there would be a sublimit of $100,000 where you can go out and procure a PR coach. Whether it was a partner got into a fight, somebody said something that they shouldn't to the mail person, or there was actually a breach. So you're talking about non-cyber related events and cyber related events. What I'm trying to get at, and I keep picking on the folks that raised their hand that said that they had cyber insurance, and do you know what it actually has? And is it best in breed? Because these forms are changing every 6 months with most of the carriers. So by the time, even if you had the best in breed product at last renewal, I can assure you I can get enhanced terms and conditions for you, or your broker probably can in the marketplace. So this slide just talked about the property, plant, and equipment and the fact that that was being insured at 62% versus the non-tangible assets, which is at 16%, which we identified was actually the higher value for the particular entity. So you see, they're insuring this, the property, plant, and equipment, but the non-tangible assets is only at 16%. There's a big disconnect within leadership in the small to medium-sized businesses. So again, as senior leaders within your organization, I would encourage to have this conversation with your leadership. So what are they taking? intellectual property, hackers taking confidential business information, the trade secrets. I think we all know that stuff. What industries are they targeting? Retailers, we spoke about that, I think, ad nauseum this morning. Hospitality. Hospitality, oddly enough, and I'm not sure if I fully understand why, hospitality in 2018 was the largest industry vertical that bought cyber insurance versus what they were doing in 2017. There was actually a 67% spike in the amount of cyber insurance that was bought within the hospitality and gaming, not necessarily restaurants. Manufacturing, I think this goes without saying. You know, we have the secret sauce here. So whether it's the recipes, the client list, the trade secrets, we have a tremendous amount of intellectual capital, most notably here on Long Island. Third-party vendors. If there's anything that you get out of today's conversation, when we start talking about cyber risk, I highly encourage you to start thinking about who is connected into your system. And then if you don't know, that's even more to think about getting engaged with maybe one of the forensic firms that are here to try and get a better handle on what your third-party risk is. Because I could tell you this is going to be very problematic coming up. We're seeing a tremendous amount of claims starting to rise from this particular type of third-party risk. So this slide is, I'll stay 1 second, just, you know, so we talked about to the folks, traditional cyber insurance. What does it cover? It's really privacy type coverage. It's going to help you in the event to notify all the affected individuals. Now what's happening is more what's going on within these boxes. As I said, the product has changed dramatically. So now you have things like the network interruption. This is the business income that we spoke about. Property damage, we have not spoken about that yet. So one of the biggest concerns from the insurance industry right now is bodily injury and property damage arising from a cyber attack. So in New York City, we have several very large real estate clients that are very well known, as you all could probably appreciate. There's been several attacks on their elevator systems. So what hackers are trying to do is get the elevator to drop from the 35th floor down to the 5th floor while people are in these elevators. What would happen? It would be on the front page of every newspaper, and some of these folks that are very large real estate families would not like the negative publicity. We're also seeing thermostats being compromised. You know, we see the Nest and, you know, all these smart homes now starting to come into play. If you're able to then break into one of those and then turn it up, obviously we're not talking about, you know, the smart homes. We're talking about our plants and our property. But what's happening is the boilers downstairs have actually gotten turned up, and we've received some claims where there was actually a fire because it was hooked up into their network, and that was what happened. They got into the network and they were able to turn the boiler, and it started causing sparks and ensued some fire. So the breach actually happens. You have to walk in Monday morning. What do? So you need to notify state attorney generals. What you would need to do is get engaged with a particular law firm. Hopefully you guys, after this particular presentation, you decided which law firm that you would like to engage. There are great ones here on Long Island. One of them happened to be the president of MCLI, and you know, they have some great resources within the cyberspace. So you want to make sure that you engage, you get an incident response plan, you start to create a disaster recovery plan, so that way when the breach actually happens, you know which law firm, and they already know what your process is. So I would highly encourage that you can engage with the law firm prior to this kind of stuff. The forensics to determine what the breach actually happened. This is now in 2019 the most expensive part of the breach. It actually superseded notification. You remember how we said in the beginning part with that radiology practice that had 97,000 pieces of paper, 97,000 stamps? That used to be the most expensive part of the breach. Now it's forensics. You got guys in New York City charging $1,000 an hour to go through terabytes of code, and I can assure you they're not finding the problem in the first hour. So although I think he's signaling for a first down, this is relative to fines and penalties. The regulatory landscape in cyber is changing dramatically. We've had GDPR come into effect May 25th, 2018. California Privacy Protection Act is now going to roll out January 1st, 2020. And effectively, it's going to be the way the states are now starting to give the individual more rights in the way that you process and identify them with their information online. So where I'm going with it, and we can do a whole presentation on GDPR, what it means, and the fines and penalties, 4% of annual revenue, 20 million euro, so on and so forth, and the maximum fines within this GDPR. But what's important to realize is New York State came out with the Department of Financial Services, Part 500, cybersecurity rules. Then came out GDPR, and now California Privacy Protection Act is coming out in 2020. I can assure you these regulations are not going anywhere, and you're seeing significantly more states starting to roll these things out. You have Washington now coming out with biometric laws. You have Texas now coming out with biometric laws. I mean, the whole fingerprint, the retina scans, this is now going to bring a whole new level of cybersecurity. So we spoke about the notification requirements. 50 different states have 50 different state breach notification laws now after 2018. The last 2 states finally came out and created these breach notification laws. So it's not like just because I'm here in New York State and I only have, my operations are only in New York, but we don't have any facilities anywhere else, but our clients still live in New Jersey, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania, we still have to notify the state attorney generals in New York, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, and New Jersey. So it's not just working with the New York State Attorney General, it's the State Attorney Generals of each one of the states where your client resides. Very important. And or the information that was compromised in your breach. So it doesn't have to be a client going back to that marketing list. Spoke about notification. Credit monitoring. So this is something, again, one of the parts that you would need to do in the event that your organization was compromised and information was leaked out there. You would need to provide credit monitoring for the affected individuals. Typically, it's about $17 to $19 per individual. Here in New York State, you have to do it for 2 years. It gets pretty expensive when you start to think about maybe 1,000 people, 5,000 people, 100,000 people. Think about how those numbers could start to multiply. I think we spoke about the PR and the crisis management enough earlier, but what I would tell you is within the marketplace, and again, for the folks that raise their hand for cyber insurance, I would highly encourage you to make sure that you have reputational risk coverage. If you don't, we can manuscript it for free. It doesn't cost anything. It's part of the negotiation. It's the way some of these carriers now are trying to differentiate themselves to get market share. So a lot of things we talked about within cyber insurance does not cost any additional money. Does not cost any additional money. It's just a matter of being aware and knowing how to negotiate. So I will leave you on this. Most small businesses have not taken the proper steps to try and comply with forget what the regulators need, just to do what is reasonable. We see a majority of small businesses, they don't have incident response plans. They don't have disaster recovery plans. They haven't identified who their third-party vendors are. They haven't engaged a law firm to figure out who their post-breach counsel is going to be or who the forensic folk is going to be. So please be cognizant of that. If you'd like help with it, we could certainly help. Marsh would be happy. Feel free to reach out to my colleague Jeff, and we'll be happy to set up a meeting where we can sit and talk with you. Thank you all for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions now.